In this video, we're going to look at using bar charts in technical writing. Bar charts are a very commonly used type of graphic, so we're going to look at when and how to use them and how to write about them. So the outcomes for this video are first to define what we mean by a bar chart, to explain the kind of data bar charts are used for, to recognize the different kinds of charts and their functions, to be able to produce an effective bar chart, and to be able to analyze and describe the contents of one. So why do we use charts and graphs at all? We use charts and graphs to display lots of complex data in a way that's easy for our readers to understand and to process. Specifically, we use charts and graphs to use colors and shapes as a way of displaying that data. And we do that to make it very easy for our readers to identify patterns and trends in the data that we're showing. Now, as with other types of charts and graphs, we can only use bar charts to display certain kinds of information. And bar charts are used to display what we call discrete categories of data. And let's just explain what that means. Here we have a bar chart that shows us fitness center membership in 2016 for 7 different countries. Now, if we look at the USA, for example, we can see that 11% of men are fitness center members compared to 17% of women. Now, if the number of men were to increase to, say, 20%, that wouldn't affect any of the other numbers in the chart. It wouldn't affect the number of women. It wouldn't affect the number of men in Canada or the UK or any other country. This is what we mean by discrete data. By comparison, if we look at a pie chart, and here we have an example showing us how a company's budget has been divided up. Whenever you have a bar chart, these numbers must always add up to 100%. So let's say, for example, we wanted to increase marketing from 17% to 20%. That 3% will have to come from somewhere else in the chart. So if one of the pieces of this chart changes, then at least one of the others will have to change as well to reflect that. So this data is not discrete. There are a few different kinds of bar chart that we might use, so we're going to look at those quickly now. The first is a basic bar chart, and we use this when we have one trend or one set of data that we want to display. We also have a horizontal chart, which works exactly the same as the basic chart, but the bars run horizontally rather than vertically. And we might do this if we have a lot of categories that we want to show, because it will make it easier to fit the chart on the page, or if some of the categories have very long titles. Another very commonly used type of chart, and the one we're going to look at most, is what we call a grouped chart. So here you have different categories of data, for example, hybrid, SUV, sedan, sports car, truck and wagon. And then within each of those categories, you have subcategories. So cars coming from Asia, from Europe, and from the USA. So here you can see how each subgroup contributes to the major category. And similar to group charts, we have stacked charts. Stacked charts work in exactly the same way as a grouped chart, except rather than putting the subcategories next to each other, we put them on top of each other. And we do that to make it easier to compare the total for each category. Whenever you're going to make a bar chart, there are certain things you have to make sure you include so that your bar chart works properly for your readers. You have to make sure you have a clear and descriptive title. You have to make sure that your axes are labeled, that you clearly state your measurements so that people know what the height of the bar actually refers to. You need to make sure that your categories of data are clearly labeled as well. And if it's a group chart like the one we're looking at here, or a stacked chart, then you need to make sure you include a key, or sometimes it's called a legend, so that people know what the different colored bars actually represent. A couple of things you need to bear in mind whenever you are going to use a bar chart. Firstly, you should only use a bar chart or any other kind of graphic if it's actually going to be meaningful. So for example, there is no point in using a bar chart if all of the bars are going to be the same height, because you're not really going to be displaying anything to your readers. So you should only use a bar chart when you have a noticeable difference in your data. As with any other kind of graphic, you should keep the chart simple and easy to read, so make sure you don't include too much information. Make sure your scales are measured so the readers know exactly what they're looking at, and make sure you number the measurement scale with commonly used distinctions, like going up in 2s or 5s or 10s or hundreds. You want to use a number pattern that will be familiar to your readers. And lastly, especially if it's a group chart or a stack chart, make sure you use colors and patterns carefully to make the graph easy to read. So let's look at writing about them. Remember, whenever you are describing a bar chart, you don't want to discuss the information. You want to write a report about the information. What exactly does that mean? Well, here, if we look at that same chart again, we can see very clearly that sedan is the most popular kind of car. So when we write about this chart, we will talk about the fact that sedan is the most popular kind of car, and we will give specific examples to support that idea. What we won't do is talk about why sedan is the most popular kind of car. And the reason we don't do that is because the chart doesn't tell us. So we should only talk about what the chart actually shows. And we do that by starting with an introduction where we clearly state what the chart is about. And here we have an example with a chart that shows us the percentage of male and female students who are proficient in a foreign language in different countries. And remember, one of the ways to make sure that your introductory sentence doesn't have too much detail in it is that you should be able to write your introductory sentence without actually looking at the bars. Once you've introduced the chart, then you need a topic sentence which clearly states the trend or the main idea in your data. And if we use this same chart, we can see that overall, the percentage of female students who are proficient in a foreign language is much higher than the percentage of males. Once we've stated the trend, we then need to give specific examples. And here is where we can talk about specific countries and start giving some numbers. So here, for example, we can see that we talked about specific countries and mentioned the numbers in each of those countries. Now, you may have noticed that there is one country that doesn't follow this trend, and you can always mention exceptions to the trend. You can either mention them in the supporting sentences or in the concluding sentence, but whenever you mention them, you must make sure that you make it clear that they are an exception to the trend. If you talk about it, but you don't say it's the exception, then it's not actually a supporting sentence for your main idea. And you can do that easily by using words like only or exception, or just say they don't follow the trend. Then lastly, we want to finish our paragraph by repeating the main idea in our concluding sentence. Or, as I said, you can mention the exception here as well. But if you're repeating the main idea, you must make sure that you use different language, use different words. And here we have an example of that. So an easy way to remember that is that the topic and concluding sentence should be like the bun in a burger, where the substance is the same, but the form is different. Let's quickly look at a few things you shouldn't do. Make sure you don't mention everything, as we've talked about before. That's what the chart is for. So you only want to talk about the trend and the best examples of that trend. The next thing, don't describe the bars. Describe what the bars represent. So for example, you would say the percentage of female students in India who are proficient in a foreign language is 60%. You wouldn't say the bar is 60%. And the last thing, don't start sentences with numbers. Always try to start your sentences with a word. If you find that you can't work out how to start the sentence with a word, and you need to start it with number, then at least write the number out as words. Don't use the number symbols themselves. And lastly, we want to look at comparison. As we said before, we use charts and bar charts specifically when we want to compare different numbers or different pieces of information. So when we're doing that, there are different ways, when we're describing it, there are different ways that we can make those comparisons. You can, for example, make an implicit comparison. Now here we have two sentences. First one says approximately 65% of women speak a foreign language. The second one, around 45% of men speak a foreign language. Now we can tell from this that the percentage of women is higher than the percentage of men, but it doesn't actually explicitly say that. Wherever possible, when you are describing a chart, you want to make an explicit comparison. Make it clear that the comparison that you are trying to make. So instead of having these two sentences like this, you should try to join them together with a phrase that makes it very clear the comparison you're trying to make. So here we said approximately 65% of women speak a foreign language, but only around 45% of men. So you should always try to use appropriate language to make your comparisons as explicit as you possibly can. And I will upload some examples of that. So we've looked at why we use graphs in general, and then specifically the kind of data we use bar graphs to display. We looked at the different kinds of bar graphs or bar charts and the different parts of them. We also looked at some guidelines to bear in mind whenever we use them, before lastly looking at how to describe them in writing. See you next time.